The paper we're diving into today is Bog Lubavi I Wieczny Pakał by Alexander Tchaikovsky.
Yeah, and just to repeat that so it lands, Bog Lubavi I Wieczny Pakał, or, for those who don't quite have the Croatian, God of Love and the Eternal Hell, written by Alexander Tchaikovsky.
Such a loaded title, right? It kind of telegraphs one of the biggest conundrums in theology. How can a loving God allow for the existence of eternal hell? That's the core issue Tchaikovsky takes on, and, well, it's not just a theological tidbit, is it? It raises questions that have emotional, philosophical, even personal weight. Like, what does justice mean? And how do we handle the idea of endless punishment?
Totally. And the significance isn't just within religious circles, I think. Even if you don't personally believe in hell or the soul, these are deep philosophical debates about what we owe each other, what evil is, and whether anything deserves infinite consequences.
Yeah, so Tchaikovsky's approach is pretty methodical. He doesn't just pick a side and rant. He actually works through the classic arguments against the immortality of the soul, against the idea of hell as a place of eternal torment, and also deals with those who try to reinterpret what eternal means in the Bible.
And he's deeply textual, pulling from both Old and New Testament sources. He looks at, for example, the debate about the soul being immortal. In other words, does anything survive death? And how that relates to the idea of eternal punishment. He's like, almost annoyingly thorough.
Yeah, my highlighter kept running out of ink. One major point he brings up is that opponents of hell often say, well, the soul isn't immortal, so nobody goes to hell forever. They just sort of wink out after death. He counters that by claiming that the Bible suggests the soul does persist in some sense. He cites Jesus, Paul, really leans on how persistence of soul is argued in those texts.
And then he gets into that famous parable of the rich man and Lazarus. According to Tchaikovsky, this story from the Gospel of Luke is one of the clearest scriptural arguments for some sort of conscious existence after death, at least in the Christian tradition he's dialoguing with. He argues that it's kind of weird to read Jesus' parables as pure metaphor, since most of the elements in his parables do represent real, relatable concepts.
He does veer off into a digression at one point. It's almost funny. He basically asks whether, if the dead can't hear us, is it even worth praying to them, as traditions in, say, Catholicism suggest? His conclusion? Not really. But it's not central to his main point. He just couldn't resist, I guess.
Yeah, and then he tightens things back up by talking about this idea of eternal punishment versus destruction. He spends an uncomfortable number of pages parsing the Greek words used for eternal in the Bible, making the point that, distinctions aside, in most contexts, it really does mean forever. So he's skeptical of those who soften hell as just a temporary thing. He feels the textual evidence doesn't back that up.
Right. And he anticipates another objection. Is it fair for a finite being, someone who sins for, say, 70 years, to be punished for all eternity? His answer is kind of blunt. First, justice isn't always about the duration of the crime. Sometimes it's about the magnitude of what's been violated. And second, he even claims that, scripturally, those in hell keep rejecting God, a sort of ongoing refusal, so the punishment fits in a sense.
He's pretty vigorous in criticizing opposing interpretations. He basically says a lot of the arguments against hell rest on twisting words or ignoring context, which, is familiar territory in most academic debates. Sometimes people just want the text to say what they wish it said.
Exactly. But he also underlines that what's actually at stake is the idea of divine justice and hope. From his point of view, hell's reality isn't meant to be a scare tactic, but rather to push us into reflection, where salvation, in his tradition, is about redemption from genuine, eternal consequences.
And this is important to stress. Academic research, even heavy theological research, isn't about laying down absolute truths. It's about exploring meanings, asking hard questions, and reflecting on what ancient texts and beliefs might tell us about living today.
Yep, whether you agree or not with Tchaikovsky's conclusions or even his logic, what he's doing is surfacing the intellectual tensions around the idea of hell and God's love.